Hello, thank you for joining us for our webinar today, Building the Future, Virtual Financial Advisor with Cyber Compliance. For our returning attendees, thanks so much for joining us once again. And for all you first-time attendees, welcome. Before we jump into the featured presentation today, a couple of housekeeping items I want to address. First of all, if you pause the live stream, it's going to cause a delay in the feed, but when you press play again, that stream will just pick right up where you left off. Secondly, during today's presentation, please feel free to ask any questions in the chat box, which is going to appear as a tab below the streaming video at the bottom of your screen there. And we will address all those questions at the end of the webinar. So now, on to the presentation, Building the Future, Virtual Financial Advisor with Cyber Compliance. What we're going to cover today, we're going to define what we're talking about with the Virtual Financial Advisor, talk about where these cyber attacks are coming from in today's virtual workplace, talk about some best practices for compliance controls, review some cyber compliance issues, talk about cybersecurity risk modeling and reporting, talk a little bit about how we can help with these issues here at Entreda. My name is Wiley Asher. I'm Senior Customer Success Manager here at Entreda, and I'm joined by my good friend and teammate, Director of Product, Rishi Malik.
Hello, everyone.
So first off, what are we talking about with, and what do we define as the virtual financial advisory services? So these are advisory services that are delivered from anywhere. We live in a mobile society, and that's no different in the world of financial advice. Second, these are delivered over digital communications. Again, we live in a mobile society, and I was just actually at a compliance conference in Arizona, and while yes, we're all used to LinkedIn and channels like that, we were even discussing the use of TikTok. So all of these channels are being used by the financial advisors of today. And as always, leveraging advanced technology that surrounds us everywhere. I want to make one point here, because what you may have heard me talk about right there, you may have thought, oh, we're talking about robo. No, these are virtual financial advisory services delivered by a human financial professional to the end customer. So Rishi, walk us through some of these. Where are these attacks coming from?
Yeah, thanks, Wiley. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the latest cyber attack vectors that affect the remote workplace, and some simple mitigation practices you can take to help minimize your attack surface. So there are several cyber attack vectors that have been on the rise over the past couple of years. With firms heading more towards a workplace environment, these threat vectors have become more prominent, as users are typically less secured without a more typical office's corporate four walls that keep them safe. So some of these common threat vectors can be seen on the slide here. Is it still showing the slides? There we go. So the very first item I'll talk about here is phishing. Now, phishing continues to lead as one of the largest cyber attack vectors. In 2021, roughly 90% of data breaches occurred due to phishing. Phishing is typically accomplished via the impersonation of a legitimate organization or individual requesting information from you, or more commonly trying to bait you to click on a link or a document within an email or a text message. Sometimes what you'll see is they'll also try to start a conversation with you to provide sensitive information that could be used against you or the victim. Now, this is an insider threat that's caused due to negligence, lack of proper setup, or just lack of phishing-related awareness from the end user. And if an end user clicks on a link or a document within a phishing email, typically how it works is they will get a piece of malicious code on their device. And that malicious code will either steal information directly from the victim, It can blackmail them through something like ransomware, or somehow harm the victim's information, their device, or their networks. Now, in a virtual workspace environment, it's important to have a few different things in place in order to help mitigate phishing attacks, right? So the first is to ensure that you have good phishing filters configured within your email client, whether you use MS365, Outlook, Gmail, ensuring that you have adequate antivirus and anti-malware protection on your device, making sure that you have proper anti-ransomware capabilities put into place, and often overlooked but very important, ensuring that you have periodic or continuous phishing simulation trainings. And what that allows you to do is to ensure that employees are aware of what to look out for, right, when they do get a phishing email, and that helps them avoid potential phishing breaches. Now, the second item on the slide here is compromised credentials. Now, with increased reliance on use of web applications, web pages, virtual workspaces, most virtual workspace environments tend to use an even higher number of cloud-hosted applications daily as opposed to a local physical office, right? Compromised credentials continue to be a cyber attack vector on the rise. And if your credentials do get exposed through a breach, the hacker who exposed them will either use it themselves to extort information or money directly from you, and or what they do is they will send the compromised credentials and sell it on the dark web for other bad actors to leverage your exposed credentials to harm you. To help minimize the attack surface or chances that your credentials are exposed, luckily there are several things that you can do. Now, one, what you want to do is ensure that you're using unique and complex passwords for each account that you use and avoid reusing passwords. The second thing you could do is to implement multi-factor authentication, MFA or 2FA, when that's available for your use. And then third, using a third-party credential monitoring service to be notified as soon as exposed credentials related to yourself or any employee at your firm have been found on the dark web. That allows you to do is to ensure that as soon as they are exposed or found on the dark web, you're able to change those credentials.
So Rishi, let me interject a question here,
Sure.
because one of the factors that I know contributes to account takeover and ransomware is that, being human, people reuse the same password across multiple sites from that cross the boundaries between their personal use and business use. So is it best to just have a piece of paper on your desk or a spreadsheet on your computer titled passwords, or what's the best way to how do you remember these complex passwords for each individual site?
Yeah, great question. So, I mean, with more and more use on having all these different passwords and different web applications and things of that sort, this is a common issue, right? Two things that I will highly advise against is writing down your password on a piece of paper, putting it on your desk. That's something that you see more often than you would think, or like you mentioned, putting it on a spreadsheet on your computer. Those are inherently vulnerable. I would not recommend that. The other thing that I would not recommend that people typically use is within a browser, like a Chrome browser. If you're logging into a site, it'll prompt you most likely to, if you want to save the password within your browser. I also advise against that because if your device does get breached, those are relatively simple for a hacker to obtain. What I do suggest is the ideal way is you're able to memorize every single password that you use, but with best practices, you want to make sure they're unique. If you cannot do that, leveraging a third-party password management tool, something like a LastPass, that would be the suggestion there for a secure way to manage your passwords and not forget them.
Got it. Thanks.
Yeah. All right. Third item on the slide here I'll talk about is ransomware. Now, ransomware is something you hear more and more about in the news each year, right? In the US alone, in 2021, ransomware attacks were up roughly 127% from the year prior. Now, ransomware is a piece of malware that, when put on a device, can lock up the entire device so that the victim or the end user no longer has access to their own data. The hacker then will typically demand a ransom to be paid out in exchange for a password or a key in order to unlock their own data and get access to it. Now, we've seen certain industries that have more access to sensitive information, like financial professionals, be targeted via ransomware attacks, as their information is worth more and the hacker is more likely to get the ransom, right? So Luckily, there's things users can do to help mitigate the risk of being victim to ransomware. Things like ensuring you have adequate antivirus protection enabled, that antivirus protection is not only enabled, but it's up to date and it's running continuously. Having mitigation practices in place against compromised credentials that I talked about, ensuring that you have endpoint backup present, right? So you want to make sure that you not only have an endpoint backup solution in place, but you have frequent backups that occur. What this allows you to do is if your device is compromised with ransomware, at a minimum, you'll have your data on your computer in the cloud in that endpoint backup solution that you can restore elsewhere. Fourth item on the slide here is network vulnerabilities. Now, network security is an important piece of any cyber program. Debatably, I think it's even more important in a virtual workspace. The reason being is if you're on premise in an office location, you're typically secured by what we call the four walls, right? And your office will most likely have several network security systems in place, things like network firewalls, vulnerability scanners, maybe even intrusion detection services that can help mitigate and prevent network-induced breaches. Now, in a virtual workspace, it's important to ensure whatever network you're using is secure. On a non-secure network, hackers can gain access to your network through multiple means. For example, if you have a non-secure Wi-Fi password or a simple Wi-Fi password, they might be able to breach your network that way. If you're on an open network, right, if you take your laptop, you go to a Starbucks or a hotel or an airport, somewhere there's a non-secure Wi-Fi or open network, that's a way that hackers can also breach, intercept your traffic there. Or what they could do is they could leverage existing network vulnerabilities that you may have on your network in order to exploit your network. The final piece here is third-party vendors. Now, third-party risk is a critical aspect of a comprehensive cybersecurity program. It's something you're hearing about more and more. Now, nearly 1/3 of all vendors in your ecosystem are considered a material risk in the event of a breach. So regulators have recently taken a great focus on downstream risk, which is requiring firms to take a deeper look into their third-party risk management programs and develop a complete list of all vendors and identify the level of access to sensitive data. Using a solution like Entreda's third-party risk management solution is designed to ask your vendors the tough questions on how the policies, procedures, and the architecture that the vendors have in place are set up to protect your data, which is ultimately your client's data, if you think about it. So I'll talk a little bit about best practices for three key areas here. The first one is best practices for virtual advisors and securing networks. So I talked a little bit about networks prior. There are several things that you could do to help protect your network, but at a minimum, here are some things that I suggest that you can do. One is ensuring you are leveraging at least a WPA2 encrypted network within your Wi-Fi. And not only that, but making sure that WPA2 network, right, your Wi-Fi network is protected by a complex and unique password. The second thing is if you are using a home network or anywhere really where guests will visit at some point, people that are non-business affiliates, you need to ensure that you have a separate guest network with a complex and unique password. What that allows you is to not share your corporate network password with guests or other people that may be vulnerable. This also allows you a simple way to segment your business and your non-business networks. Now, another thing you could do for an added layer of security is use a VPN when you're able to do so. What this does is it helps ensure that your web traffic on your day-to-day is encrypted to warn away bad actors that may be trying to spy on your network traffic. You can also run a vulnerability assessment on your network periodically. And what you would do is ensure that you address any vulnerabilities found within your network through that assessment. Now, a vulnerability assessment will identify known vulnerabilities within your network that bad actors may use to breach or to exploit your network negatively in some way. By identifying these potential vulnerabilities and mitigating them, what you're doing is you're really helping minimize the potential attack surface of your network, which is key. Now, the second critical piece I'll talk about here is securing endpoint devices. No matter what type of environment you're in, VDI, normal environment, what have you, you always want to make sure that your endpoints are secured. These include devices like Windows, Mac, mobile devices, right, your iOS and your Androids, anything that you're using for business purposes. there are many things you could do to help secure your endpoint that are critical, right? So some examples are going to be ensuring that you have an adequate antivirus software that's on all of your devices, that it's enabled, that's up to date, ensuring you have a firewall on your devices and that's enabled and properly configured. Ensuring that your device is password protected and using complex and unique passwords. It's also important to ensure that your devices are fully encrypted, so if they do get in the hands of a bad actor, you'll at least have an added layer of security there. Something I see often overlooked but very important is also ensuring that your operating system patches are applied promptly. If you are not a security guru, it is recommended to use a security solution that monitors, remediates issues ideally on your endpoints. This allows you to help avoid some security gaps that you may have. Now, using a solution like Entreda Unify, for example, can help monitor over 40 security parameters on your endpoints continuously, notify you when anything is not in line with either best security practices or compliance regulations, and provides you the option to remediate deficiencies with a click of a button in real time. Now, the final piece on this particular subject is virtual channels. So you also need to ensure that the virtual channels that your firm is communicating across are approved and properly supervised under policies that ensure FINRA and SEC compliance. So virtual channels like social media or collaboration platforms like Teams and Zooms can be easily managed with products like the Professional Archive, which is a solution from our parent company, Smarsh, that provides capture, archive, supervision, and e-discovery software all in one tool.
Another aspect that you need to be sure that you've got in place is your cybersecurity policy. If you don't have one, you need to get one in place. And within that cybersecurity policy, there are a couple of key issues, a couple of key points that need to be included. First is risk classification, which is the classification of the severity of the threat of the breach. Secondly, when a breach does happen, who is notified and what is that procedure? These are two critical aspects to your cybersecurity policy that is part of your written supervisory policies that are absolutely critical to be included. Rishi, let me throw it back over to you to talk about risk modeling.
All right. So I'll talk a little bit about cybersecurity risk modeling. Now, when it comes to implementing a comprehensive cyber program, it's important to be able to measure, identify, as well as report on risk, right? Cyber risk. So the first thing I'll talk about is measuring risk. Now, tackling the mitigation of cyber risk at a firm is not a simple task, and anyone can vouch for that that's been through that. It is important to first be able to use a system of some sort to be able to identify and measure exactly where your cyber risk lies and what it is, right? So there are multiple ways to accomplish this using third-party tool like Entreda Unify or a homegrown solution. By measuring cyber risk, you'll be able to quantify within a firm where exactly your risk lies and how the cyber risk posture changes over time. Now, the second piece that I'll talk about here is being able to identify that risk once it's measured. So after measuring risk, you can then dive into exactly why a particular device, a user, an office, or firm as a whole has more cyber risk than others. So for example, if an entire office location chooses to not encrypt their hard drives because they think the process of encrypting their hard drives is a nuisance, this office will have inherently more cyber risk associated with it than others. Now that you have this measured and identified, you'll be able to help mitigate this particular risk by ensuring that the office in that particular example encrypts their devices, right? Now, the final piece of this is regulatory reporting. So being able to show regulators that you're effectively measuring, identifying risk, and that you're taking appropriate action, which is key to mitigate those risks once they're identified through reports that can show auditors and regulators what they are looking for based off of regulations. Now, this kind of feeds into what we do here at Entreda. Entreda is a cybersecurity risk mitigation solution that helps you manage cyber risk and the cyber compliance process as effectively as possible. We at Entreda focus on minimizing risk across the 4 pillars of cyber, as we like to call it: the endpoints, the users, the networks, as well as the vendors. Now, we do this primarily through our Entreda Unify application that sits across all flavors of devices, Windows devices, Mac devices, mobile applications for iOS and Android. And it monitors these devices continuously for cyber and cyber compliance related deficiencies. If the app on any of these endpoints identify any issue in real time, it can alert the end users and any administrators on the account in a multitude of ways. And it also provides end users the ability to not only monitor these, but actually remediate the issues in real time with a click of a button. In addition to the application that I just talked about, Entreda provides an a la carte menu, if you will, of services, allowing you to really pick and choose services you require to complete your cyber program. So some of these services that we offer are things like third-party vendor due diligence. We also offer phishing and security awareness training. We do vulnerability assessments and penetration testing, dark web monitoring, and much more. Now, all of the data that's collected across these endpoints and services are presented real time in a personalized dashboard. The dashboard is hierarchical by nature in that it maps to the organizational hierarchy of our clients, meaning that whenever someone's supervision responsibilities or their purview are, they can go ahead and log into a dashboard and they can see their users and devices under management. Now, finally, we assist firms building out a cybersecurity policy. If they already have a policy, we're happy to provide guidance as to ensuring that cybersecurity policy is up to par. And we also provide access 24/7 to regulatory-ready audit trail reporting all through the Entreda service.
All right. I invite you now to log in any questions you might have. Rishi, we've got one that I think is right up your alley, which is, how do you know if your credentials are out there on the dark web?
Yeah, so great question. So the only real way is going to be to leverage a third-party solution. And what these third-party solutions do is they monitor the dark web continuously. They're looking for exposed credentials. And if they find one, then they'll notify you in some fashion. Now, in Entreda Unify, we do provide a service like this, and what we do is we're continuously monitoring the dark web. If anyone at your firm has exposed credentials anywhere in the dark web, you're notified in real time via an email notification. We tell you exactly what to do the second that it occurs, and then we have a support system in the back end if you have any additional questions to make sure that your credentials are no longer vulnerable or exposed in the dark web.
All right, let's see if we've got any other questions out there. That was the only one during our presentation. Let's see if we can gather some others. Come on, don't be shy. Give it a few seconds here. Okay, that looks like the only question we got. I appreciate that. Rishi, appreciate your time. If anybody has wants to have any more dialogue, please reach out to us here at Entreda. Visit entreda.com, and please stay tuned for our upcoming webinars on regulations, collaboration tools, third-party risk management. And actually, I'm sorry, we do have another question that came through. Rishi, again, right up your alley. What is the best practice for performing a network vulnerability assessment?
Yeah, so great question. So a network vulnerability assessment comprises of 2 components. There's an internal vulnerability assessment and there's a remote penetration testing. So what it is, an internal vulnerability assessment is going to probe your network from the inside out. So let's say you're at an office and you'll scan the environment using an endpoint, and it will scan the environment from the inside out. It's looking for vulnerabilities, known vulnerabilities. What this mimics is if someone broke through your front door of your office, or if you have a disgruntled employee, this will show you what vulnerabilities on your network those individuals can exploit. That's the first piece. The second piece that you want to take care of is something called a remote penetration test. And what this is if you have any servers in the cloud, if you're using any cloud applications, or just looking at your environment, right, your office from the outside, And we do something similar where you can identify vulnerabilities and ways that hackers can get in from the outside. So this is going to most prominently mimic a hacker that's out of the country or something like that, and how they can damage your network from the outside. So the important piece of best practice here is to ensure that you're not only completing an internal vulnerability assessment, as well as a remote pen test. The next thing that I would suggest that some people tend not to do is once they're identified, you want to make sure you're actually doing something about it, right? So you want to make sure you're actually mitigating those vulnerabilities. So by performing an internal, a remote pen test, and then mitigating those vulnerabilities, and then doing another assessment to make sure that those were properly mitigated is best practice there. And Entreda does provide vulnerability assessments as well as penetration testing. We also have a cyber team that can kind of help you walk through that practice and additional best practices there.
Yeah, from a regulatory standpoint, it's worse if you knew about it and did nothing. So it's very important to plug those vulnerabilities. Well, Rishi, again, thank you again for your time, and all the attendees appreciate your time as well. Again, be looking forward to the upcoming webinars in this series, and we thank you very much.
Thanks for joining, everyone. Thanks, Wiley.